You would think 100 years after the greatest fire in Augusta history, we'd know what started it, but we don't. You'd think a century after a fire left 3,000 people homeless and 35 city blocks burned up, that someone would have been held responsible. They weren't. 100 years after the March 22, 1916 blaze, we have maybe 100 amazing old photos of an inferno and its aftermath. We have hundreds of eyewitness accounts. We have newspaper clippings and insurance company records and 10 decades of Augusta family anecdotes. But we have only one mystery: what started it? Most histories blame an electric iron left unattended in Kelly's dry goods store in the Dyer building at 8th and Broad. That's as good an explanation as any to explain what happened on that windy Wednesday in 1916. But it doesn't explain why it took them 42 years to find out about the iron. Our suspect household appliance made its debut in a Chronicle feature story in July 1958, written by longtime newspaperman John F. Battle. Considered an expert on the history of Augusta firefighting, Battle almost matter-of-factly mentions for the first time that an electric iron was the culprit. He attributed this information to unnamed firemen. A more scholarly investigation into the fire source took place in the 1970s when the Augusta College History Department reviewed the files of the Augusta City Council as well as many newspaper accounts hunting for the fire starter. The best they could find was an account in the Macon News that said the fire began in a pile of rubbish on the ground floor of a store. Again, no attribution nor public record was cited. While we do not know for sure what started the 1916 fire, we certainly know what caused it. That's because Fire Chief Frank Reynolds issued a blistering report in the Augusta Chronicle 5 days after the blaze. Tops on the list was wood, the heavy use of wooden buildings in Augusta, the pervasive use of wooden shingles, zoning laws or lack thereof. Chief Reynolds also called the 30-year-old Dyer building a fire trap. Once the fire started, there was almost no way to stop it. Reynolds not only seemed to realize this immediately that night, but responded just as quickly. He ordered his men out of the blazing Dyer and asked that firefighters from other Georgia and South Carolina cities be called in. Augusta was going to need help because any large fire would be hard to stop. Then there was the wind. Newspaper accounts don't indicate it was anything abnormal, but the witnesses all mention it. And there had to be something that would blow the singed hymn book pages from St. Paul's Church all the way across the Savannah River into South Carolina. The wind blew sparks from one wooden roof to another, creeping slowly east and consuming 541 dwellings and 141 business buildings. Among them were St. Paul's historic old church and the Tubman School for Girls, the fireproof Augusta Chronicle building, and many fine old homes in Augusta's oldest residential neighborhood. The financial toll was $4.25 million. In today's dollars, that's about $100 million. The real culprit? I think after a century's worth of perspective, we can pretty much blame the lack of leadership by city officials. City Council minutes of February and March 1916 showed a disregard for public safety by failing to curb the use of wooden shingles. 5 weeks after the fire, Mayor James Littleton still objected to buying new fire engines. He called them unnecessary. And what do you think was the Augusta City Council's first order of business 5 days after the most devastating disaster in the city's history? Discussing the legality of poultry running loose on streets within the city limits. Augusta's citizens fought the fire. They survived the fire, and they rebuilt after the fire. They did something useful, unlike the city leadership, which was very busy chasing chickens.